So let me put across a simple framework which I think will be easy to practice, especially when you are very angry. So how do we handle anger? I would propose a two-pronged approach to anger management. One is to recognize and the second is to handle. As simple as that. So let me start with recognizing. It's all about noticing and taking stock. Recognition is the first step towards addressing any issue in life. So it is important that we develop the habit of understanding our anger in our lives. To develop a personalized language and vocabulary around anger that you can relate to. This can help you to not just get a better understanding, but it also helps you to put a boundary around what's making you angry, or even in the case of others. In other words, you start to get a more nuanced understanding, because quite often we find there is even a reluctance to accept that there is anger around. It's like, I am not angry. Yeah? So, do you know the potential bright red spots of anger in your life? Start with that awareness. And in the lives of those you know and you interact with. Sometimes the anger is passive, maybe suppressed, just about smouldering, which then becomes molten, red hot anger, a kind of blind, savage, tempestuous fury and rage that will destroy everything in sight. Then there is also this passive aggressive anger with indirect expressions of hostility, stubbornness, deliberate procrastination. Indeed, this one can be particularly harmful.
Because we don't recognize them as anger.
Yeah, it is hidden in some form or the other, as you may not even know for sure what's beneath that calm outward exterior.
Right.
So typical, isn't it?
I agree.
We see it a lot in the world of backstabbing and office politics. And then, of course, there is the constructive form of anger that is channeled for better resolution of issues towards better outcomes.
So it's not that all bad things about anger.
Yes, anger has so many shapes, so many kinds, and different people use it different ways. Can we stop, pause and observe and find out the shades of anger? That's one level of awareness. So let's look at our own lives. Go ahead and scan your life to recognize the anger spots and potential triggers.
Okay.
So this may include, I have a couple of points here. Point 1, typical anger loaded situations, both at workplace and in personal life. We might see that there are certain situations where typically you get angry or somebody else seems to get angry. Maybe appraisal time is something that comes to mind. Then point 2, people who aren't that good at managing their anger. 3, people who cause and aggravate anger in others, including yourself. And then point 4 is about dormant and misleading calm.
Very important.
Yes. These are situations that may cause anger to erupt in future. Do you know which is that next volcano waiting to explode? The 5th point is about things that make you angry, disturbed, frustrated in general. There may be certain triggers, maybe the way somebody speaks, maybe the way somebody responds to certain questions, or maybe certain behavioral traits.
So probably can you provide some examples here, like what kind of typical questions or areas we should look?
Certainly. So, for instance, do you know someone who has faced relationship or friendship troubles caused by problematic anger issues? In your life, do you know someone at workplace who's known for temper tantrums? Have you noticed how this has vitiated the work environment? What exactly is causing that to go out of control? Or do you think that people in general are becoming angrier? And does that include you as well?
Right. And when I think about workplace, so many things can make me angry or anyone angry.
Yes.
It could be sometimes neurotic bosses
Yep.
or irritating customers.
Agree.
Sometimes it could be the irresponsible team members. Again, it's my perspective.
Yes.
And some of the employees which I consider as work shakers or office politics,
Right.
unfair policies, or in some cases even insufficient recognition or rewards
That's a big one.
to the deserving people.
Yes.
And then there are the direct exploitation or emotional abuse that happens between certain relationships in office.
Yes.
Wow, there is so much indeed that I'm just thinking about one area and seeing that there are so many things that can lead to those frazzled nerves and situations where I can get angry.
Indeed. Indeed. Now, the idea here is to scan the landscape around anger rather than just saying I'm angry.
Okay.
To look around and develop this awareness, what is causing the anger, what dimensions of the situation or events are causing the anger, and now maybe even to go one step further, to even rate the anger experience, provide a ranking.
Okay, so what you are saying is first we should go and note down all those areas,
Yes,
whether active or passive ones,
Yes.
which are triggering anger,
which are triggering the, which are causing that anger.
which are causing anger.
Yeah, which
Or
are arousing that
situation
anger.
or people. And all.
Absolutely.
Okay. And second you say is rank them.
Rank them.
Interesting.
Yeah, let me share some thoughts on that. It may help to classify anger causing situations and triggers with some kind of a ranking mechanism. Maybe a score like 0 to 10, 10 being the most aggravating situation.
Or maybe a color code.
Yeah.
Like bright red for explosive kind, orange for the level below that,
Yeah.
or a light yellow for a milder version of it.
Very true. So what works for you, pick that and work with it. The only suggestion I would give is to pick something that's simple to work with, especially when you are very angry, because that's when you need to be practicing this. We are not talking of some academic research exercise here. This is something you've got to do when you are right in the middle of the situation. Right? So it's also important to know your own patterns. Now we have analyzed the landscape, we have done some ranking and got a sense of what level of anger am I experiencing. It's also important to know your own patterns. And what do I mean there? Imagine you are confronted by unpleasant situations or people. How does that impact you?
Right, so in your case it could be different.
Yes.
In my case it could be different.
Yes.
So I need to recognize my pattern.
Yeah. Because that awareness is at the core of self-awareness again. What is your thinking like at that stage? What kind of thoughts come to your mind when a particular person's name is called out? Or what are your feelings like? What kind of emotions do you experience? How often do you experience these? How does your body respond to that anger?
Very true. It's not just the speech part of it or mentally or
It's
angry.
not just a mental impact. Many of us experience certain bodily sensations when anger crosses a certain threshold. Are you aware of that? For instance, the change in the pace of breathing, or have you felt some tightness in your muscles or chest area or stomach? Do you frown, for instance?
Yeah, maybe for me, I observe that some that kind of a rush of blood
Uh-huh.
in my forehead area,
Okay,
and sometimes my palms will start to get sweaty.
okay, okay.
I mean, now when you're saying, yeah, but I never looked at it that way.
And to analyze it. Because Piyush, the interesting thing here is that we are working with our mind-body connection here. And the more you develop this awareness of these sensations, we are getting certain slightly earlier signals which are going to be useful soon in the subsequent sections of channeling anger. And that's where it helps to pay attention to these sensations and become aware of what exactly happens. Is it a tightness in the muscles, or is it, as you said, sweaty palms, or increased blood flow on the forehead area? It's unique to you. Start recognizing it. And from this awareness to further manifestation of this anger in your brain, it's just a question of a couple of milliseconds or a split second. So having this awareness and developing this awareness is going to be very beneficial.
Okay, so is there a science to this anger?
Indeed, there is a science to this anger, and absolutely path-breaking research that is happening even as we speak. With the kind of advances that neuroscience, for instance, has made in the last 10 to 15 years, we are now getting so much more information about how our brain functions, and that too at real time. So now that you brought up this question of science of anger, let's look at what typically happens in our brains when we get angry. Often the process of anger spiraling starts in the very instant we get confronted by a situation or an event that triggers that anger. We've already discussed that in the previous segment.
Right.
It may get built up over a period of time, and before we realize it, irritation, what started off as irritation, turns to annoyance, then to anger, and finally boiling rage, which might even turn violent. Research has shown that in the brain, we experience an amygdala hijack in moments like these.
Amygdala hijack.
Yes. The limbic area of our brain, which is the powerhouse of our emotions, now has to spring to action. So what happens there? Let's find out. Now this is the area of the brain which prompted our ancestors to run to safety when a wild beast was spotted. So in the prehistoric times, let's say you are in the middle of the forest and there's a sudden noise, and it could be an imagination, it could also mean a wild animal waiting to attack you. Now in that split second, you've got to make a choice and either fight that animal or flee the scene. That ability is encoded in this part of the brain. The limbic area, or the emotional brain, provides that extra impetus to make those choices. Now this is the area of the brain which prompted our ancestors to run to safety when a wild beast was spotted. You might have heard of the fight or flight response to any likely threat. That fight or flight response is sorted out in this area of the brain to begin with. In fact, the truth is that it hasn't evolved much over the years. To a great extent, that's true. When you're in the middle of the road and you hear a screeching sound, you can't start analyzing the exact speed or the angle in which the vehicle is going to swerve. You might just want to get up and run away to safety. And that response is very important for your safety. To spot the danger and get its act together in no time. It's important to retain that. But what if we hand over our control buttons to this dude, even in our day-to-day situations where actually there's no threat of survival?
And that's how our life is nowadays.
Yes. We seem to be evoking that panic button unconsciously far too often.
Right.
That's what we do when we react to simpler situations as though all hell broke loose. Kind of blowing things out of proportion and fretting and fuming. Our emotional brain quickly takes over to supposedly protect us because it is getting all the sensations and signals of a person in danger, potential life-threatening danger, because you are displaying all those symptoms.
So even though we are evolved now,
Yeah,
we are still using that fight or flight response
yes,
in our small personal situations or
Yes.
work related situations, and kind of making it sound bigger than what it is.
making it seem and making it almost feel like we are going through some major catastrophe.
And
That's the-
naturally reacting like that.
Yes, that's the signals that our senses are providing to the brain. Because all said and done, this is just a function of signaling. That we take inputs from using our senses and then feed them to the brain, and then the brain can advise this is what we need to do. And if we start over dramatizing situations, which many of us are prone to do, we are activating those circuits and wiring in the brain to create simulated emergencies and situations, which is going to have a certain impact, which may not be that pleasant.
So now you are going on a different track where in place of blaming others,
Yeah.
we are trying to blame brain.
Well, that's a googly, Piyush. I like the way you put it, indeed. Let's not blame the brain.
So what you are saying here is that getting angry is actually our natural response.
Yes, yes.
So do you think we can control it?
Certainly we can if we work with it.
Okay.
And most importantly, not deny that it is happening. Remember when we spoke about the shield that we create, and that shield of perfection, that self-image and all of that, those are not the best ways to deal with it, because we may suppress the anger or ignore it or pretend something else is happening. So as I said, the emotional brain quickly takes over to supposedly protect us because we are in this seemingly dangerous situation. Let's turn the gaze a little inward and also look at ourselves, at our own patterns. We've already done that self-awareness activity.
Right.
Let's take it from there and see how this is impacting us when we consider the science of anger, the science behind anger. The rational area of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, can actually do the waiting game now, because the brain is now switched on to that protect mode. This also means goodbye to reason, at least for a short while. Goodbye to rational thinking. In fact, the design of the brain is such that the signals picked up by our senses must travel through the emotional area of the brain before it can reach the rational area of the brain, which is the prefrontal cortex that's located just behind your forehead. For the signals that you have picked up using your senses, for these signals to travel through the brain, they enter from the base of the neck, and then they have to travel through the emotional area before they can reach the area behind your forehead, which is the seat of rational thinking. So the idea here is and certain sense of inevitability, that you will feel the anger before you can even think about it. But therein lies the scope for redemption also. Because it might sound like, oh my God, I can't do anything because I'm wired that way, that I have to feel the emotion before I can actually rationalize it and do something about it. But all is not lost, and we'll find out soon. And before we find out about that, let me just put a few thoughts about what's happening with the rational brain. Obviously, the rational brain has been asked to take a goodbye for the time being. That doesn't mean the rational brain is going to be switched off just like that. There is going to be awesome damage control to be taken up in the aftermath of the amygdala hijack dramas. Sometimes other people also need to be pitching to undo the damage that's caused
True.
by these spontaneous reactions.
Right.
So once the damage is done, there's a lot of work that needs to be done by the rational brain to pick up the broken pieces. So the rational brain doesn't need to worry too much. It will get its share of being busy very soon. But coming back to what we just said about all is not lost. You will learn a lot about life from these post-amygdala hijack experiences. Our post-event rationalization and justification cycles, for instance, are all part of the damage control, isn't it?
Right.
As you can see here, the amygdala hijack is exactly where we start to lose it. And that is precisely where regulation can do its magic. We spoke about recognition. Now, regulation can come in at this stage.
Very interesting point.
We started off our conversation with this question of, are we glorifying anger excessively in our societies? We've also looked at the impacts of anger in our lives, the very huge damages that it seems to be causing, and the need for a model that will allow us to channel anger towards better outcomes. As we said earlier, no, it's no one's case that we shouldn't get angry. Anger is a very natural emotion. What is important is to work on that signal that this anger is providing us. That there needs to be some change for the better. That's what took us to the model, to recognize, handle,